Good evening. Before we get into the program for this evening, as chair of the Neighborhoods Committee, I want to make you aware of some opportunities that are coming up this Saturday. In addition to my son's wedding, there is, at Pier 62 down on the waterfront, there's going to be something called a Golden Gathering. It's going to be from 10:30 till 2 o'clock, and it's going to include music, movement arts workshops, a live folk music singer, Randy Bowles. There's going to be some interactive activities about marine life in Puget Sound with some old friends from the Seattle Aquarium. There'll be board games, card games, art activities, and other things going on. So the audience intended for this are people of our age. They're calling it a Golden Gathering. I'll put the notice about this on the bulletin board. It's going to be at Pier 62, but it's this coming Saturday. And as I was telling the Neighborhoods Committee about that, they said, Ginny, the good news is the G-Line ride starts on Madison on Saturday. So you know how our lives have been so disrupted by the work on Madison Street? Well, starting on Saturday, you can ride for free on the Rapid Ride G-Line, and it will take you all the way down to First in Madison, where they're going to have free pizza, if that matters to you. And so it's an opportunity perhaps to begin to learn how to use that line that will take you from First and Madison up to Martin Luther King Boulevard. And so some of our favorite stores are along that ride. And it's going to turn out to be, I think, very convenient to us after the inconvenience of having that road torn up. So think about Saturday. I'll put the announcement about the waterfront event on the bulletin board. Tonight we're in for a real treat to learn about art that's available for us to view, art that's in public, available to the public. It's not all in public spaces, but it's all available to the public. And our friend and guest speaker, Jim Rupp, is going to tell us about the art that is available to us in the area that's between here and Lake Union. He's written a fabulous book that maybe many of you know. We have a copy in our library here at Horizon House. I've bought a few copies myself, but I tend to give it to people who have moved to Seattle, and so right now I'm going to have to buy my own copy again. But inside it has walks that are organized around different neighborhoods in Seattle, and then tells you about the art that you can see. And as friends who walk with me know, I'm a person who tends to walk from point A to point B, and my goal is to get to point B. And I'm walking by all these interesting things that I'm not paying attention to, and I'm not asking myself questions about. But when someone writes a book like this, you're going to begin to say, holy smokes, I need to have my eyes open, and I need to be seeing what's here. Jim is a graduate of Whitman College and Seattle University Law School. He's the author of Art in Seattle's Public Spaces, From Soto to South Lake Union, which was published in 2019 by the University of Washington Press. He's a Seattle native, a longtime lawyer, and local historian. Jim has collected information about art in Seattle public spaces for over 40 years. Jim is now completing a third book, Art in Seattle's Neighborhood Public Spaces, a book that covers over 320 artworks displayed throughout Seattle outside of the downtown area. He is working on a fourth book, which at the moment is titled The Great Decade, Developing Seattle from 1900 to 1910. Jim also, in his spare time, is president of the Pacific Northwest Historians Guild and is serving his 6th year as a trustee of this organization. Before serving as a guild trustee, He served 3 terms as a trustee of the Museum of History and Industry, MOHI, and before that, he was a member of the board and president of the UW Friends of the Libraries. Jim is also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Laurelhurst Community Club and is that neighborhood's resident historian. So here is a man who is curious about art, he's curious about history. I said, are you going to tell that story about how you got involved in this, how your family brought you into looking at art? He said, that's a question you could ask me after I give my talk. I want you to know that I encouraged Jim to bring copies of his book today. They're available for $35, and he would take cash, check, or Venmo if you're interested in buying a book afterward. Can you stay around while they run up to their units if they need to get money? So we're so privileged to have Jim here with us tonight, and I know that you will open up your eyes when you take a walk after you hear him talk too. Thank you so much for coming.
It's still on? Yes, it is. It's a pleasure to be back. I was here when the book was first published in 2019. And we had a good time. I was a little startled to come in and see you have 3 screens here. It was a great time with all the people at Horizon House, so it's a pleasure to be back. As Ginny mentioned, this is my second book on the subject. My first book was Art in Seattle's Public Places, and that was published in 1992 by the University of Washington Press. And that covered the whole city, everything from the northern city limit to the southern city limit, including SeaTac Airport. Back in those days, you could just wander into the airport and look at their collection. You can't do that anymore. But that book had about 325 artworks, the whole city. Now, this current book has about 325 artworks just from SoDo to South Lake Union and the waterfront and the sculpture park. And that's why I'm working on the next book, which is Neighborhoods. And that has 15 chapters. So there's a chapter on First Hill and Capitol Hill and West Seattle and South Seattle, etc. One of the big differences from the old days with the first book in 1992 was we had a chapter called The Denny Regrade, and it covered Belltown and Denny Regrade area and South Lake Union, and there were 11 artworks in that chapter. In the current book, chapter 9, which is up on the top of the screen, that is South Lake Union. That used to be part of the larger chapter in the original book, but now South Lake Union has over 35 artworks. That's the big difference. This is chapter 9 of my current book. I'm going to show you about 25 of those works. We're going to go on a little tour of South Lake Union. And one of the big differences is that Paul Allen owned a lot of property, and his estate still does. He has a company called Vulcan Real Estate, and every time they build a building, whether it's for Google as the principal tenant or Microsoft, they commission an artwork. So there is quite a collection of art in South Lake Union. Most of it comes from Paul Allen and his venture. Now, what is public space? A lot of people think if I say public space, I'm talking about something that the city owns or it's a government place. I define it as it's a place where you can go as a member of the public and readily see a piece of art. So building lobbies, plazas, parks, things like that. If you have to go up to the second floor of a building and bother people, that's not public. But if you can wander in and take a look, I include it. The other thing was, where does all this art come from? A lot of it comes from things called the Percent for Art funds, which are laws that were passed, and Seattle is a good example. If Seattle has a capital project, they're building a building or redoing a facility, 1% of the budget goes for public art. King County has a similar law, and then Washington State has a law, but it's only, I think it's 0.5% for the state. And then, of course, we have developers. Paul Allen, who I just mentioned, Wright Runstad Development, when they build buildings, they would often commission an artwork. And then Martin Seelig is another big commissioner of artworks or purchases artworks for his various buildings and properties. I discuss that in another talk I give. There's not so much of anything by them in South Lake Union, but there's plenty to talk about in South Lake Union. And one of the things you're going to notice when I talk about these artworks is there's a recurring theme a lot of the time. The artist is creating an artwork after learning about the history or the culture of the area and bringing that into the work. And I'll talk to you about that as we go along. So let's take a tour. This is a portion of the map for Chapter 9 in the book, and we're going to start at the north end of Lake Union Park. And Lake Union Park is unique because it doesn't allow any artworks. The idea is you should have a vista to look out on the park or out on the lake, see what's going on, and then there are a lot of activities that go on in this park. So there's never going to be a big commissioned artwork there. But at the very end of the park, on the water, is a piece called Blanche. And this is created in 2010 by a fellow named Peter Richards. It's wood and steel and stainless steel, and it includes PVC pipe. And what we're looking at the top is a boat, and this is the Blanche is derived from the Blanchard Junior Knockabout, which is a 20-foot sailboat. It was designed and built by the Blanchard Boat Company, which built boats on Lake Union for 60 years. So what you're seeing is a stainless steel covered sailboat hull, which is originally wood. And it's upside down. You can rent one that's right side up from the Wooden Boat Center, which is just nearby. And Blanche is meant to connect the people to the surrounding environment and the local history. Ever-present boating on Lake Union, a boat building on the lake, which still is done a little bit, but not as much as used to be. And then the craftsmanship, as you look at it, you see the ribs of the original wooden sailboat. What is unique about this piece is this sailboat acts as kind of a sound chamber, and the posts that hold that up, you see that little black circle on one of the posts. That's one of the places you can put your ear up to and listen to the water sloshing through from down below. And to me, you need an awful lot of water action to really make it interesting. But if you put your ear up to it, you'll hear some things. And that's what Peter Richards had in mind, was to give a kind of a multi-purpose artwork. Now, one of the things about a public space is you're supposed to be able to go in and just look at it without bothering people. Technically, Mohi is not a public space because you're supposed to pay to get in. But when I give a tour, I always go into Mohi and they let me in, and they'll let you in too. If nothing else, you can say you need to use the bathroom. Then you can sneak around and look at Wawona. This is by John Grade. It's 65 feet tall, it's 11,000 pounds, and it hangs from the ceiling at Mohi. It's made of wood from the historic 1896 schooner called Wawona. Wawona was 165 feet long and was moored on South Lake Union for years as they tried to renovate it, and finally it just rotted away. A friend of mine told me he could kayak up to it and put his fist through the hull. So they finally gave up. But John Grade and his team got wood from the Wawona, and John created this pretty impressive sculpture. It has stains on the wood. That's leached corrosion from the iron in the original ship. Stains on the wood are from fish oils accumulated during 3 decades of cod fishing up in Alaska. And then it also includes some of the repair patches made during the ship's life, where they repaired the wood. And then they also reinserted original wooden pegs called trunnels, and then they capped them with wrought iron posts. So it's talking about Wawona, but it's also reminiscent of a tree. And then you'll see all these funny little black things going up. Those are protrusions that are kind of inspired by microscopic calcium carbonate shells of phytoplankton called coccolithophores. And they're little tiny organisms that float in great masses in the sea, just above the surface or just below the surface. And then as they start swarming, as they go up, they kind of diminish as they get up. So you see a larger collection down below, and then they get thinner as they go upward. That's a type of thing John does. It gets very involved in the history and environment and things like that. And the special nice thing about this is as you look at this tree, you can go around and walk inside it as if you are in a forest and walking in the rotted out trunk of a tree. And then when you're inside, you can look up, and it's as if you're looking up perhaps on the base, the stern of a ship that's standing on end, and you're looking up through the hull. And you'll see some light up at the top. That's not actually a window. It was going to be a window originally, but it kind of refers to the fact that at the top of on the roof of Mohi is another portion of this sculpture. And then down below where you're standing is plexiglass, and you can look down, and another portion is down below, and it's hanging over water. Mohi extends out over water. And John's idea is that this sculpture you're looking at in the museum, that's the preserved portion that museums would, museums are responsible for keeping things preserved. But on the top and the bottom, those are all going to kind of wither away and weather away over the years in the natural process of things. I always like to tell the story. This thing moves, by the way. You can go up to it and it hangs, but it'll move about 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch. And I sent John an email one time when I was at the museum because a little boy was standing there, and I went up to Wawona and I said, "Look, it moves." And I pushed it, and the little boy went running across the lobby of the museum to his parents and said, "Mommy, Daddy, it moves." So John thought that was pretty good. The next piece John did with wood from Wawona is here at Horizon House. If you go into the dining room, there's that kind of convoluted piece. That is made from pieces of Wawona. And this was the first really big public commission that John Grotti ever did. Another piece that's really worth looking at is just above on the mezzanine level at Mohi. This is called Engine Room. Sometimes it's called Engine and Fire Room. This is by Kenneth Callahan, one of the great artists of his era in the Pacific Northwest painting. This is oil on canvas. It's one of a group of 11 paintings. This one was done in 1936. They're all owned by Mohi now, but they were created for what was the Marine Hospital, and it's now Pacific Tower. That's the big building up on Beacon Hill. And so this painting is at the museum. There are 7 other paintings that the museum has loaned to Pacific Tower because they were commissioned for the lobby of that building. So if you go to that building now, you'll see the paintings in the lobby that were commissioned for that space. Now we're going to leave the museum and we'll be at the Center for Wooden Boats, and this is called Honor Pole by Klawock High School students, done in 2007. This is not a great piece of Native American art. It's pretty good, but it's not anything like you see by the really well-known Native American artists, but it has an interesting story. This is a 28-foot tall carved cedar totem pole. In 2005, students at the Center for Wooden Boats here in Seattle, they carved a canoe called Spirit of Peace. It was a 36-foot long cedar canoe, and they gave it to the city of Klawock. And that's in Prince of Wales Island in southeastern Alaska. In 2007, carving students at Klawock carved a pole, and they gave it to the Center for Wooden Boats as a gift from the Tlingit people and the city and community of Klawock. And at the top, we see an eagle and raven. They're prominent figures in Pacific Northwest Native culture, and they're the 2 principal crests of the Tlingit Nation. Eagle stands on a bent wood box, which represents the box of knowledge, and the box design depicts a Gakonadate, which is a wolf-like undersea monster who bestows wealth. And then the male figure below, that is the boys of Klawock, and he holds 3 coppers. They're shield-like symbols that are the ultimate sign of wealth and prestige in many Northwest Coast Native tribes. And then down on the second, on the bottom half, we have a female figure with a pierced lower lip accentuated by a labret. That's a plug worn by noble women of northern tribes. And she holds a model of the spirit of peace, the large canoe that was given to the people of Klawock. And she represents the girls of Klawock, and she stands on the curved tail of a killer whale. And the killer whale, the Tlingit describe it as the most powerful being in the ocean, and this represents the ocean nations. And then at the bottom, that face is the people of Klawock. Now we're going to move on away from the Center for Wooden Boats out to Valley Street. And in 2013, Ellen Solid was commissioned by the city under its 1% for Art program. They were redoing the Mercer Corridor and Valley Street, and they had money, and they commissioned Ellen Solid, who's a local artist. And she created the thing called Mercer Corridor Streetscape Art, and it's 4 different forms. They relate to the history of Lake Union, or some of them, this particular one does. This is the first piece. These are black granite benches, and these are on Valley just south of Mohi. And they relate to the history of Lake Union. Most people walk by these things, and they're black, and they don't pay any attention to them. But what you're looking at is something that was influenced by the curved sides of boat forms, and then those rough-hewn ridges, they refer to coal and lumber that was transported on Lake Union long ago. The next thing as you walk along, you'll see what we used to call a manhole cover. And this is a cast iron spider web hatch cover. And there's one of these on Fairview Avenue in Mercer, one on the northwest corner, one on the southwest corner. So one needs to look down and look up and all around when you're wandering around Seattle. And this refers to the World Wide Web, a spider web. It's also the web of life, and that's the focus of much of the work performed in the nearby biotech companies. And as we move along, we run into these things. These are mosaic tiles which are on 3 corners. They're 7 feet in diameter. They're sidewalk inserts. And she created these to kind of engage people to contemplate the thoughts of the characters depicted. So here's a person, and you'll notice the little speech bubbles, and there's nothing in the speech bubbles. She thinks people should be inspired to kind of imagine what is being said. And then farther along is a dog and a cat, and they have their speech bubbles, and so you can imagine what they're talking about. Now as we go along Westlake, we'll turn on Mercer just briefly, and we're going to see this piece, which is one of the more lovely pieces, I think, in the whole area. This is called Mural. This is about Jaume Plensa. Jaume Plensa is a Portuguese artist. Actually, he's Catalan, not Portuguese. This is painted stainless steel. It's 12 feet high. The mural is Catalan for mirror, and these are identical figures, and they're looking at each other. His pieces, he's focusing on the internal dialogue and interpersonal communications. He says, every one of my projects pretends to create a certain quietness, a place where you can listen in your own words, your own heart, and the lack of opportunity to do so in the modern world troubles Plensa. In this case, we have a human figure. They're identical. They're just mirror images of one another. And the human figure is a container for thoughts and emotions, and the figures are hollow to allow viewers to enter within and think quiet thoughts. It's a lovely thought. When you're on Mercer, probably maybe 3 in the morning on Sunday, you can have a quiet thought. But other than that, it's a lovely piece. And this is made up of letters from 8 different alphabets: Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Greek, Cyrillic, Hindi, and Latin. But there are no words. These are just single letters. And he says each letter is like biology. It stands alone, the cell stands alone, and may accomplish a little. But when associated with others, it can create text and do a myriad of other things. Now, Plensa is the same artist who did Echo. This is out of the South Lake Union area. This is down in the Seattle Art Museum Sculpture Park. But I mention it because it has the same theme. I gave a talk once, and a member of the docents from the Seattle Art Museum said, well, you know, Mr. Rupp, Echo is the Greek myth of Echo talks so much. A Greek goddess condemned her to repeat everything that was said to her, and to try and stop all this nonsense talking. And the person from the art museum said, we get into that Greek myth a lot more than you did. And I kept quiet, but there's really no need to get into the story of the Greek myth. He chose Echo because it's basically the same story that I told you, or the same approach as with Myrrell. She's looking serenely, her eyes are closed. It's a time for quiet contemplation and thoughtful thinking. He wanted to create a place, he said, where you can listen to your own words and your own heart. So that's what Echo is all about. Now we're going to go a little farther between Mercer and Republican. This is up in the ceiling of a breezeway. This is called There Is Another Sky. It's by Spencer Finch, and he's known for unusual conceptual public works that use color and light to create unique experiences. And what he's done is he has these different colored discs, and they're all the colors of leaves that you would see in the forest. And when the sun shines through, you get a green hue down in the breezeway as if you're walking in a forest. One of the things that really impressed him is the centerpiece is the artwork. A lot of what you're seeing is reflection from surrounding windows, and he thought that was pretty cool. All of a sudden, his artwork is much bigger than it was. And also on the ground level, just in the planters around, are some little LED lights on upright posts, little tiny posts, and they flicker on and off as if you see fireflies in the forest. He often draws his inspiration from Emily Dickinson poems, and that's There Is Another Sky is an Emily Dickinson poem, and it fits this piece. It is, there is another sky, ever serene and fair, and there is another sunshine, though it be darkness there. Never mind faded forest, Austin, never mind silent fields. Here is a little forest, whose leaf is ever green. Here is a brighter garden where not a frost has been. It is in its unfading flowers I hear the bright bee hum. Prithee, my brother, into my garden come. Now, when I give my tour, my wife said I shouldn't say that poem because it extends the tour too long. But as long as we're here. Now we're going to move on to one of the newest works in South Lake Union, and I must tell you it's not in the book because it was just installed just a while ago, about a year ago. And this is by Patty Warashina. This is called Dreamer. This is painted aluminum. It's 18 feet long. She's known for small ceramic work. She's one of the leading ceramic artists in the country, especially of her age group. She's 84 years old now. 7 of her works are in the current Seattle Art Museum exhibit called Poke in the Eye. And in 2020, she was honored as Smithsonian's Visionary Artist for that year. And this figure sits in a pond. This pond is supposed to capture stormwater. And you note there's a fish coming up, and there's a fish on her feet. And there's no message here. It's just a good comical piece with she's painted it as she paints her ceramic pieces. And I saw her the other day, and I said, "Gosh, I understood you did this because it's a pond, and that inspired you, and then there's perhaps some meaning." And she said, "Oh gosh, no, there's no meaning at all. Vulcan told me there's going to be a little pond there gathering water, and I thought this would be kind of a nice image to have." So that's what she did. Now we're going to move on a little farther. This is hanging up in the air. This is called Nebulous. It's done in 2015 by an artist named Dan Corson. And this is glass, transparent, conducting film, aluminum, photovoltaics, LED lights, and electronics. The problem of which, with electronics, sometimes they don't work. And the artist now lives in Hawaii. So this thing works kind of, sort of, sometimes. But I show it to you because you might see it. There are more than 350 glass discs, and they change levels of opacity, and they pulsate at various rhythms. And he refers to the cloudy weather and Seattle's role in computer innovation and the fact that both environmental and technological climates are changing. So there's ever-present changing in this technological work. So it's kind of interesting, and as I say, even when it doesn't work, it's kind of interesting, but it's especially interesting when it's kind of pulsating and changing. Now we'll go to another new piece. This is a group of 4 dangos by Jun Kaneko. This is at 8th Avenue in Harrison. In that portion of South Lake Union, 8th Avenue really looks like a pedestrian breezeway or pedestrian walkway. And my wife was with me the other day, and she said, "You better get out of the street." And it is a street, but it's, landscaping all around, and we have all these dangos. He's been creating these for over 20 years. Dango means rounded form or dumpling in Japanese. And the forms may not seem complex, but the monumental size and the thickness of these things was quite a challenge for any artist working in clay. And each illustrates his reputation for unique inventive patterns and painterly application of glazes. And I particularly like this one. When you look at the bottom section, a little hard on the photograph, but it looks almost like it's some kind of a stonework. Now we're going to move on to a piece called Restack. This is by Annie Hahn and Daniel Mahalio. They're also known as Lead Pencil Studio. This is done in 2015. This is a commissioned work. It's 20 feet high and 25 feet long. And what they do is they look at the history of the area. They look at photographs of the area, what went on, what's going on now, and they create an artwork that's inspired by that. And this is custom-made stainless steel wire mesh, 10 different gauges that decrease in size as the structure ascends. They wanted to make stone out of welded steel. And what this is referring to is old buildings, primarily old buildings. You'll see arched windows I guess I do have a pointer here, but you can probably see the arched windows right up here. There's one, and there's another. That's referring to the old architecture of the old buildings that have since been torn down in South Lake Union. And they saw a lot of pictures of warehouses in South Lake Union with a lot of pallets stacked up. And also at the current Amazon facilities, where we had all sorts of things kind of haphazardly stacked and not evenly stacked. And so what they're talking about is this is really the hard edge architecture and the stack of stone buildings that were built. And they were thinking about the incredible changes that happened in the Denny regrade, and they wanted to refer what was there and what's been scraped away. And then this structure is also right against the edge of the sidewalk, because in the old days buildings didn't have setbacks as they do now. And then when the sun is right, as the sun goes along, you'll see the ghostly image of this building on the sidewalk and the street. So it's all referring to things of the past and the effect of the future.
Or is this a projection?
Oh, it's real.
All the way up.
All the way up, all the way up. It's all little tiny mesh made of metal, all welded together.
How deep is it?
So somebody, go ahead.
How deep? How deep?
I think it's about 6 feet deep. Okay. Now, let's go on to something really modern. And this is called Placeholders, Cloud Rock Tree, done in 2007 by Claudia Fitch. And this is one of 3 pieces of 5. And they're kind of odd looking. You kind of wonder, what is she getting at? And in the early 1900s, Terry Avenue was an industrial use area with a few old growth trees that still remained. Of course, by then, all the old growth trees in Seattle were cut down and shipped away or used for construction. And there were a few trees left, and she knew of that. And so she's referring to that fact. And then on the ground, there are planters that are in the shape of trees, and she also had some trees planted, and they're all part of the artwork. There's also inlaid brickwork that's shaped like the shadow of the sculpture above. So here again, it's a good thing to look up and down and all around when you're looking at art in public spaces. Now we've gone up the hill a piece, and this is called Periscope. This is by Deborah Ashheim, and this is a Vulcan commissioned work, like most of these. And this one works. It's inside. It seems to be protected. And these are glowing blue synapses and video screens, and this is the artist's visualization of a fragment of the internet. I can't tell you. Oh, wait just a minute. It is... Thomas, it's in the book. if you have the book, it's in the map, but it's between Thomas and John Street on Boren. And we're going to see another piece on Boren in just a minute. When I was with my photographer for the book, we were taking photographs of this piece, and there was a homeless fellow who had had quite a bit to drink. And Miguel, the photographer, had to get to work, so I started the conversation with this other fellow to kind of keep him out of the way. And the fellow looked at this and he said, "You know what those are? Those are synapses." And he was right. And you never know who's paying attention. And in a similar vein, I went to the old federal courthouse, and I was kind of peering in the lobby, and the security guard said, "May I help you?" And I said, "Well, my first book in 1992 had 2 paintings in this lobby." And he said, "Oh, you mean The Effects of Good and Bad Government by Caleb Bach? That's up in the library now." I thought, good for you, you're paying attention. But this is made of rotocast resin, solid core optical fiber, and these videos change daily. They're made up of surveillance and webcam images from all around the world, and it's a looping dynamic video that keeps going. So it's really kind of an interesting piece.
And it's indoors, but it's public.
Say that again?
You said it's indoors.
Well, it is, you can walk right up, it's in a window on the side of the building on Boren. And then when you look at that, you walk about 6 feet away, and on the corner of Boren is called Woodpile. This is by Jenny Heischman. And this is 8 feet long, or 19 feet long and 8 feet high, and this is a stainless steel woodpile. And that blue tarp you see is made of bronze. A lot of people walk by and think, well, somebody left it there, and I'm not going to touch it. It's dirty. But it's actually part of the sculpture, and this is a common rural element that she's added to this sleek, hard-edged architecture. And she wanted a playful response in referring to bringing kind of the rural feeling to the hard urban development. And then also this is a slant down the hill that's going down Boren, and she thought that'd be kind of fun to have a playful response. If that piece of wood is removed, those logs are going to roll down Boren. Now, I mentioned to you Annie Hahn and Daniel Mahalio, who did Lead Pencil Studio, did that ghostly image. This is their newest piece in a public space. This is called Transforest. This is done in 2018. This is at the new substation on Denny. That's that really modern-looking substation, and the Seattle City Light decided we're not going to build that typical thing. We'll get together with the community, do something different, and of course they had some 1% funds. And so they commissioned Annie and Daniel to do something unique. And this is 110 feet high. It's basically a steel electrical transmission tower with trees. Well, what's that all about? Well, it refers to bringing electricity to Seattle, customers in 1924 from the first dam on the Skagit River. And Danny and Annie found out that, there was a lot of work to bring electricity, tear down a lot of trees and put up these towers. And then they knew that when a tower was done, the workers would get up there and put some tree branches on it. That was a custom. And they were intrigued by that history. They also admire snag trees that are remnants of great towering trees that are dead or dying. You'll see them as you're driving through the Cascades. And they provide critical habitat for woodpeckers and other creatures and before they decay and return to the soil. But they'll be basically a big dead snag with some living parts of it. And so Transforest, this sculpture, has the same height and girth and shape similar to their favorite snag tree in the Cascades. Now, I gave a talk at the Mirabella the other day, and this is right across the street from Mirabella, or not close to Mirabella. And one of the residents told me, I'm on the level that looks straight across, and there's a crow's nest up there now. And they said, we're just delighted with that. And they have baby crows. And she said, it's delightful until the crows come to my deck and poop. But other than that, it's a lovely piece. Now, we're going to move to the other portion of this electrical substation. And this is called switch wall. the orange and blue lighted structure portion of this City Light substation is Ned Wall's creation. The stainless steel or the metal that you're seeing below, that's part of the substation design. But Switch Wall was done in 2018 by Ned Kahn, and what he's known for innovative sculptures that enable viewers to observe and interact with natural processes. He has a piece at Seattle Center, which is a big granite bowl, and water shoots into it, and you see the water swirl around and go down the drain in a natural way that water does that. In this case, before he created this, he was in a hotel in downtown Seattle, and he looked out and saw lights going on in different buildings, and he thought, you know, every time one of those lights goes on, a human flicks on a switch. So what this does is these are thousands of thin anodized aluminum tiles, and they swing on posts. And when the wind blows, they'll blow back and forth, and when they blow in one direction, they will turn on a little orange light, and when they blow the other direction, they'll turn on a little blue light. And so you're seeing the natural wind force create something for you. And he describes these as they're just recurring themes of nature. Another piece by him that's not in South Lake Union, this is on Fifth Avenue and Lenora. This is called Tholian Web. And when you look at this, you think, well, that's just kind of a grid that's over a parking garage. But on the right-hand side, what you're looking at is what this thing is made of. And there are pieces of thin metal that hang on posts. And while the one that I showed you at the substation goes right and left, these go back and forth on the surface. And when the wind blows, if it's a nice wind, the whole wall undulates with the wind. So it's a great effect. So when you're walking down Fifth Avenue and you get to Lenore and look up, that's what you're looking at. Tholian Web, the name came from the fact that Paul Allen is a fan of Star Trek. And there's a famous story in Star Trek where the evil Tholians have the Enterprise spaceship trapped in their web, and they're all going to die until Captain Kirk and his people save the day. Now we're going to go a little farther into the South Lake Union neighborhood, the old Troy Laundry Building, which was a lovely old brick building, and they built a building on top, but they kept the brick structure around it, and there are two artworks there. This one's called Mechanism by Jim Blashfield, and he's an artist in Portland, and this is epoxy-coated aluminum and electronics, and what you're looking at is 11 high-definition monitors. And the largest frame is really from an antique industrial scale that was left over from the Troy Laundry. And he's exploring changes over time. So what you're going to see on this, when it works, which is not all the time, but each one of these screens has a different photograph of something going on in old historic South Lake Union, Lake Union, various places in Seattle. Pardon? It was a laundry. This is the old Troy Laundry building. It's between Thomas and Harrison Street, and was a grand old brick building, and now it's, I forget who, it's one of the Amazon or one of the high-tech companies is there now. The more interesting piece to me is a piece by Annie Hall and Daniel Mahalio, and this is called City Fragment. And here's another example of these two artists looking into what used to be at South Lake Union. Here again, you're looking at the same type of steel mesh that they used on the ghostly building that I showed you. And they researched the area, and of course you may recall the old South Lake Union, before it was developed, was a lot of warehouses and a lot of parking lots, and each parking lot had a little booth where a man sat there and you gave him your money, and there was an arrow saying pay here. And this is a wire mesh ghostly image of one of these parking structures that used to be there. This is one of the ticket booths. And they wanted to bring some human scale into this complex of imposing buildings and give people reason to pause and talk about the current environment and reflect on what was here before. And then at night, there's a blue light around the sign at the top. This sign right up here, In the old days, that would have said parking, and that's all outlined in blue, and then there's other indirect lighting. So it's very nice at night, but it's actually very good in the daytime too, so I recommend it to you. Now we're going to go to, there we go. This is right across the street from what we just looked at. This is called Articulated Start by a fellow named Eric Ely. And this is steel and stainless steel and paint. And it looks kind of like a abstract of some kind of a plant. There are 4 elements. You're looking at the 2 in the landscape, and then there are 2 that hang from the ceiling. He wanted to give you kind of an element of surprise. What he's referring to is the shapes refer to plant life, but they aren't. The facets and the angles make it seem as if they are planned and controlled, but they're moving on their own. And this refers to the rapid development of South Lake Union and of Amazon, which is the building's owner. In both cases, those involved may think that growth will happen according to algorithms or other calculations, but it isn't really controllable. Growth occurs on its own in unpredictable ways. So that's the message he's sending to us with this abstract geometric plant life that is growing in the plaza. Now here's an unusual piece. This is, and everything that Buster Simpson has ever done is an unusual piece. He's a local artist, and this is called Ping Pong Plaza, and the whole plaza is an artwork. You're looking at a regulation-sized ping pong table. And it has stainless steel netting, and then the light up above, right up here. This is all part of it. And then the interesting thing is the table legs right here. Each one of these table legs, those are the shapes of great thinkers. They're profiles. And here's a detail you can see over here. There's one of the table legs, and these are the profiles. This is like one of those things you see where they ask you, do you see the one shape or do you see the other shape? A lot of us may just see that darker gray shape, but you look over here and you see that guy's nose right there. Well, there's his nose right there. And those are the table legs, and he has profiles of great thinkers, and their names are on the plaques underneath. We have physicists, Max Planck and Albert Einstein. Then there's molecular biologist, geneticist, and zoologist James Watson and biophysicist Rosalind Franklin. And then we have biologist Stephen Jay Gould and Edward O. Wilson. And then we have French naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and English naturalist Charles Darwin. And Simpson tells us that the paired individuals here represent a metaphysical ping pong match, bouncing ideas and concepts back and forth, each in pursuit of validating a hypothesis. Wow. So who knew? Now everybody else just walks by and doesn't pay attention, but now you will notice. Now we're going to go and see a piece by Ann Gardner. This is in a little plaza right off of Terry Avenue. No. Yes, it's on Terry Avenue. And Ann Gardner does work with Smalty tile. And these are tiles, it's created by a process developed during the Byzantine Empire. You take molten glass and you mix it with metal oxides, and then you form it into slabs, and then you hand break them into individual pieces. And then in some cases, you top the tile with gold leaf, and then you cover it with a thin layer of glass. And this gives a resulting iridescence. And when I show people this is like looking at a painting. When you see it, it looks like yellow things. When you go up and look at it, it's like looking at a painting where you see each of the paint strokes, which combined create something, create the entire picture. And this thing just glows, and there's gold, and there's yellow, and there's silvery gold. And that's what she has made her career doing. And if you want to see more of her work, on the way to the Horizon House dining room, you'll see these curved pieces of glass mosaic. That's Ann Gardner. Now, remember when I showed you the pile of wood on Boren that was piled up, and Jenny Heischman said she wanted something that brought the rural to the hard-edged urban environment? This is another work by her. This is called Cabin Corners, done in 2010. And this is 3 corners of this little plaza. It's with artificial logs of hand-painted aluminum. And again, this is her rural addition to the high-tech neighborhood, and it also refers to the region's logging history history. And she thinks of it as an imaginary room, and it all goes back to her childhood, where she created what she calls fabricated reality. And it arose from her experiences as a child in Florida, where she created seasonal changes with plastic, aluminum leaves, and artificial snow. So she's been creating these artificial environments all her life. Now, when you go a little farther and get to, let's see, Bourne Avenue, and then you cross over Terry, we're going to go through a little a breezeway. And there are two buildings that Vulcan built, and they wanted to have something provocative and interesting for the plaza. And so they commissioned Jamie Walker, who's the dean of the UW School of Art, to do some pieces. He's done 3 elements. They're all painted aluminum. Jamie, like Patty Warashina, is very well known as a ceramic artist, but does smaller works that are shown in galleries. So he did some very large works for this commission. And what you're looking at, the blue figure, is called Toto. And this is a playful pet, and at first glance, some may think of a little teddy bear, and it's named after Dorothy's little dog in The Wizard of Oz. And then, as you walk farther down, going west in the plaza, hanging up 20 feet high on the corner of the building is called Clouds. And this is an ever-changing cloud formation, not literally ever-changing, but it's referring to ever-changing cloud formations, or maybe one that's descending as it gets full of moisture and it's going to rain. And that's what he's referring to. And then you'll notice you can see just better right around right there in that area. You'll see that it's a little different color. And what he did is painted it kind of an orangey red. And when the light shines on that color, it reflects onto the building. So maybe sunset or sunrise is reflecting off the cloud. Kind of an interesting piece. And then the last piece is called Beacon. And this is over 11 feet tall, and what he's evoking is geological forces that create mountains, and some may envision subterranean forces bubbling to the Earth's surface. And the reason I have this detail on the other side is you'll notice these concentric rings that he added. And what he did there is he wanted to give the idea that this thing was spinning, kind of an illusion of spinning orbs. I gave a tour once, and a member of the faculty of the UW Medical School said, "Oh, yes, and it reminds me of the such and such cell as it spins around." So you never know what people are going to get out of a piece of sculpture, but this is what Jamie Walker had in mind. Now we're getting towards the end of this tour, and again, we'll cover about 25 pieces. There are probably 35 pieces in the book, so I can't cover everything. You may have another question about something in South Lake Union, and it's there. I just haven't included it because I'm not supposed to be here for 2 hours. This is called Origami Tessellation 3 squared 4.3.4 fractured. And this is by Ellen Solid. She's the one who did the works that I talked about at the beginning with the granite benches and the inlaid pieces. This is the last piece of her Mercer Island streetscapes. And she wanted a technologically oriented work for what she calls this multifaceted neighborhood of biotech and technical research. A tessellation is an arrangement of shapes placed side by side to produce a pattern without gaps. And this tessellation is one used by engineers to study the buckling patterns of cylinders. And the design began as a drawing, which was then scored and folded like origami. And the numbers in the sculpture's title are those used in the title of the engineer's tessellation, and they refer to the specific folding patterns and the number of sides of each polygon, which is beyond me, but that's what it is. Now, while her art relates principally to the highly technological space to the south, it also refers to natural features at South Lake Union Park to the north. And then there's interior white lighting, which emphasizes the folding pattern lines between those geometric shapes. So this is one that's best seen at night. And there's also exterior blue light that illuminates the piece at night. So we've gone pretty much a full loop. You'll see on this map I have end right here, and that's where tessellation is. But we're not going to end there. We have one other piece, which is a brand new piece, and it was installed, and I saw it, and I thought, well, where did that come from? And this is an example of my life, because I saw this and I thought, what is it? So I checked with Mohi, and they said, I don't know. And then I checked with the Center for Wooden Boats, and they said, we don't know. And then I checked on the internet in various places, and somebody said, isn't it lovely? Where did it come from? And I don't know exactly how I finally found out, but this is the latest piece installed by Vulcan Real Estate, which is the Paul Allen company that commissions works for its public spaces. And this is a very, very end corner piece of a piece of property they have down there where Daniel's Broiler used to be. I think it's, no, not Daniel's Broilers, but there's another big restaurant on Lake Union, and they're renovating and rebuilding the whole thing. A new restaurant's due to open in the next couple of months. And this is called, the artist is Klingit, Robert Mills, and I sent him a email, and I said, is there any way you can teach me how to pronounce this? And I haven't heard from him. I'm going to call it Yaadachon. That is Klingit for straight ahead, and this, of course, is a native canoe, and it looks like it's stainless steel. It's actually aluminum, and you'll note on the bow and the stern and in the paddles, there are Native American designs. It's form line design, which is what the Northwest Coast natives used in all of their artworks. And what he's talking about is by straight ahead, these paddlers, as with all canoes, they've got native canoes, they have paddlers on both sides, and they're going to be people of many different ages and sexes and races. And where we're going, he says, is fully dependent on the other person rowing, whether we're going to go straight or in circles. And he says, in this really political climate of today, representing both sides of the canoe, it represents the need to work together, no matter which side we are on, to continue to move us forward. You all have to work together. So there we are. That is your tour of South Lake Union. As Ginny mentioned, I have books over here that are $35, and I take check and cash, or Venmo if you use Venmo, which a lot of people I found do use it. But now we have time for questions. So let's see how that's going to work. Okay. Now I gather is there some technology that, is there going to be something passed, or do I just repeat the question?
No. So what's going to happen is...
Who has a question?
Oh, okay. So they're going to take microphones.
So like you just take one.
All right.
Go right there.
Okay, good. So we're going to start right over there with a question. All right?
Let's see if it's on.
It's on.
Okay, so we used to live in a place that looked out over the electrical substation and looked out towards Mirabella and looked out at that tree that was growing up there, the steel tree. And it's changed since we last saw it, which was a year ago. And I'm wondering if it's finished or not.
Oh, yeah, it's finished.
It looks like it has antennas on the top. Is it a working object?
No, not that I've ever heard. I don't think they would add antennas to that artwork.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's finished. I saw it the other day. I don't recall anything that looked like antennas. Let's go.
There it is.
Yeah, you can see. Is this what you're talking about? These little things up here?
Yeah.
Yeah, they look like antennas, but that's just part of the sculpture. Little branches of the tree, I suppose. Don't know.
Anyone else curious?
Another question?
Yeah.
In not this book, but the one you showed earlier with the map and the sections of the city, I know that a few years ago, art pieces in the market were cataloged, but in, I think it was section 2, it was mostly the waterfront. So I'm wondering if you include the artwork in the market.
Yes. Gosh, there are probably, let me see, probably 5 or 6 artworks in the book in the Pike Place Market, including starting with Georgia Gerber's pig, and then she has a second pig, and then there's the first work installed by Richard Beyer is included,
Right.
and a number of other pieces.
Okay.
Yep. So you can walk all around the Pike Place Market with my book and just see them all.
Right.
And by the way, the book doesn't tell you what you're supposed to like. This book tells you what it is, how it got there. I interviewed over 90 artists, so you get to hear what the artist has to say about the work, and then people can decide which ones they like. And on my talk about the overall collection of art, there are a number of examples where there are artworks that people thought, that's ridiculous. Why is that art? A very good example is Henry Moore's three-piece sculpture Vertebra, in what used to be First Bank Building. When that was installed, people just said it's just a bunch of bones. We don't quite understand why anybody would spend money on that. And then people started to learn that Henry Moore had in mind that even the smallest thing can be made monumental and can be made sculptural, and there's a certain tension between these pieces. They don't really join together like vertebra. They're kind of separated. And then in 1986, it was sold to some Japanese, and all hell broke loose. And people said, this is our sculpture. This is iconic Seattle. And so a number of people got together and bought it back, and three-piece sculpture Vertebra is the only Seattle Art Museum artwork of, sculpture that is not on Seattle Art Museum property. But it remains in that space, and it belongs to the Art Museum.
Over here, where's the typewriter eraser? We're all trying to remember where we've seen it. I mean, I've seen it many times, but I don't remember where.
The cover of this book is now a collector's item. When the book came out, a lot of people said, well, gee, that's great photoshopping, because that piece is down in the sculpture park. Well, it was in the sculpture park originally. This was part of the Paul Allen collection, which is a perfect choice for Paul Allen, since he was one of the people principally responsible for the death of the typewriter eraser. And this is by Klaus Oldenburg. And then Paul Allen loaned it to the Art Museum for 5 years, and then he moved it in front of Mopop, which is the museum he created at the corner of Seattle Center. But when he died, his will decreed that his art collection be sold and all the money be used for charitable purposes. So this piece went to New York with the rest of the collection and was sold for $1.8 million to a New York dealer. I don't know where it went from there. I was hoping some Seattle people would go back and buy it and bring it home. But that didn't occur. And the Paul Allen art collection went for over $1 billion. It was just amazing what... usually an art collection at Christie's auction house in New York, they might start bidding at, 25,000, and then you go 10,000, 10,000. Maybe you'll start at 100,000. One of his things started at $1 million and just kept on going. There were Monets and Manets and Cézannes, and it was quite something. So, but that's where that went. Happily, I'm not quite clear what the story is, but the Miral, the two white figures on Mercer by Jaume Plensa, that's part of the Paul Allen collection. But that hasn't been sold, so maybe that was supposed to stay where it is, which is in front of the Paul Allen Center for Brain Research, which is kind of a nice sculpture for that building. Other questions? Ginny said I should tell the story about how all this started. You mean about the press and... Oh, okay. Well, she remembers a talk I gave here at Horizon House, and one of the things I start with, people always say, well, how did you come about doing all this? And I start with a picture of my high school yearbook photograph, because I was in high school when I started collecting material on this subject. Because in Seattle there were artworks, not many, but whatever you saw, you were lucky to get a plaque, and if there was a plaque, it would tell you maybe the name of the piece and the artist and the date, and that would be it. And there wasn't anything that told you where it all came from. And I kept a file on the subject in newspaper articles and anything I could find. And then in about 1982, I suppose, my aunt and uncle, Marshall and Helen Hatch, were two of the major art collectors in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if you know the paintings of Morris Gray's, but when they died, they had 45 Morris Gray's paintings. And I think when they gave their collection to the Seattle Art Museum, it was worth about $6 million. So I was brought up with this. And they would have events at their home, and I would be a bartender. And they had a dinner for a committee they formed that had Anne and Lang Simons, who used to live here, and Ann Gould Hauberg, and Lee Soper, who lived here, who was one of the heads of the University Bookstore, and Don Elligood, who was the head of the University of Washington Press. And this was a committee to raise money for a book on the sculptures of Philip McCracken. And he has several pieces in the book. And then, after we were done with cocktails, they said, well, you might as well join us for dinner. And after dinner, they said, well, we're going to have a committee meeting. We need a secretary. So it was a setup, and I became the secretary of this committee. And at one meeting, I said, you know, I've always thought it would be good to write a book on art in Seattle's public places. Back then, we called it places. Now the University of Washington Press wanted to call it spaces, and that's good, too. But, and Don Elligood said, gosh, University of Washington Press would publish that one. And Lee Soper said, I think the University Bookstore would sell a lot of them. So they published 5,000 books, and we sold 5,000 books in 2 years. And back then, Seattle was a big deal in public art because our Percent for Art programs were innovative, did more than other cities. There were other cities who had older commissions. Richard Andrews, who was the head of the public art program, said one of the major differences were in Philadelphia and various other East Coast cities, you had some very well-heeled art collectors and people who would be on the commission, and they would decide which artworks would be installed. Seattle, Richard said, was a very yeasty environment in the Arts Commission because they had artists on the Arts Commission. And these artists came up with some kind of crazy ideas, which turned out to be pretty impressive and were something unique and interesting. And so people around the country were interested in finding out about it. So we were selling books in San Francisco and Chicago, and Oxford University Press gave it a review, spoke well of it. I don't know how it got all the way to Oxford. But anyway, so that's where this book came about. I always wanted to do a second book because there's so many new artworks. So I did a book, a manuscript on the whole city, and I took it to the University of Washington Press, and it was 111,000 words. And they said, well, you got to do 2 books. We can't just do a huge book. People want to carry it with them. So that's why I'm working on the neighborhood book, which the manuscript was mostly done some time ago, and now I'm cleaning it up and adding pieces. So there you go, the story of Jim Rupp and Art in Public Spaces. Okay, any other questions? And if something comes to you, if I'm going to be signing books perhaps, I don't know, but we'll see. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for offering to come and be with us tonight. Doesn't it inspire you to get out there and see things? It's so lovely. And to look at the book and to see what you've walked by for so long and to find out something about it. And like you say, it's so much better than just seeing the name and the artist. It's so interesting to learn something about the piece that goes beyond that. So thank you so much.